Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They thought a group of veterans sharing stories in a dusty Arizona garage was harmless until one neighbor's thirst for control sparked a war. When false accusations and secret surveillance threatened their sanctuary, these warriors fought back. This isn't just a story, it's a battle for dignity and justice. I never really planned on settling down in Arizona, but life has a way of steering you off course and handing you a blueprint you didn't ask for. After 20 years in the Marine Corps and another couple bouncing between jobs I didn't care for, I ended up in a small, sunburned town near the southern edge of Phoenix, just far enough from the city to still smell dust and hear coyotes at night. The house was mine, bought it with my own money, rebuilt most of it with these hands. A modest single-story place with a two-car garage and a long gravel driveway that made my knees ache just looking at it. The neighborhood was a strange beast. On one side, you had older homes like mine, outside the reach of any HOA. On the other, Oak Ridge estates, newer, shinier, soulless. And HOA run, of course. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, trash bins, and color-coordinated cubbies. And presiding over it all like a queen in her cul-de-sac castle, Karen Fitzgerald, HOA president, self-appointed moral compass, and walking Botox advertisement for suburban fascism. We met once when I first moved in. She showed up with a clipboard and a fake smile, tried to welcome me with a packet of community regulations. I politely, very politely, told her I wasn't part of her kingdom and wouldn't be joining. Her lips pressed together like she was sucking a lemon, and she left without another word. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've kept to myself. I mow my own yard, fix my own fence, and talk to no one unless they're holding barbecue tongs or a wrench. My peace came in the form of Wednesday nights, the one time I opened up the garage and turned it into something useful. After I retired, I got restless. Nightmares don't retire with the uniform, and silence isn't always peaceful. So I started inviting a few old buddies over, then a couple firefighters, a former state trooper with burned scars and trembling hands. We all had something in common, not just the uniforms, but the shadows we carried long after. Eventually, a friend of mine, Derek, a licensed psychologist and Navy vet, offered to come by and help facilitate the group. We cleaned out the garage, put in an AC unit, added some comfortable chairs, and strung up an old Marine Corps flag on the back wall. Someone donated a Keurig. Another brought snacks. One guy gifted a bookshelf and filled it with paperbacks about trauma, survival, and second chances. No one paid a dime. There were no sign-in sheets, no therapy bills, no advertising. Just a place to sit, talk, breathe, and not be judged. We called it the Midwatch. The time when darkness is deepest, and you need someone awake beside you. I guess that kind of setup doesn't sit well with people like Karen. First time she poked her head in, it was a week before Christmas. We were just wrapping up a session. A guy had been sharing about his third failed marriage and how he couldn't even hold his grandson without breaking into a sweat. Karen pulled up in her white Lexus and stood by the edge of my driveway like she was inspecting a crime scene. I walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Evening," I said. She didn't respond to the greeting. Her arms were crossed, and she was eyeing the half-circle of parked vehicles along the gravel like they were enemy tanks. "There seems to be a lot of traffic to your house lately," she said. "It's Wednesday. Always is. Are you running some kind of business out of here?" "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "Just some friends gathering." She squinted like I'd handed her a Sudoku puzzle in Russian. "That doesn't look like a casual gathering. There's a visible parking disruption. Your guests parked in a way that blocks the entrance to our cul-de-sac. I've had several complaints." I looked back. No one was blocking anything. She was full of it. "Well, ma'am, if you've got concerns, feel free to take them to the city. Just a heads up, though, this house isn't under your HOA's jurisdiction." Her face twitched. "That may be the case, but your property borders Oak Ridge Estates, and anything that affects our residents affects us all." I gave a short laugh. "With respect, that's not how property law works. You have a good night now." She didn't leave right away, just stood there for a bit, eyes narrowed, lips tight. Then she pulled out her phone and took a picture of the house, or maybe the plates on the cars. I didn't say a word. Just watched her drive off with the same expressionless composure I'd used in war zones when idiots in suits started making decisions for people who bled. That night, we finished the session early. The guys felt it. tension in the air like gunpowder on concrete. Derek stayed behind afterward, and we laughed it off, but I could tell he was uneasy. "You sure she's not going to cause problems?" he asked. I shrugged. "She can't touch me." Turns out, that was wishful thinking. The envelope came 3 days later. No return address, just my full name typed in all caps and a stamp slightly crooked, like it had been slapped on by someone in a hurry. I opened it at the kitchen table while my coffee was still steaming. Inside was a single sheet of paper, formal letterhead, seal of the municipal zoning office at the top. My eyes skimmed the lines. Notification of zoning violation, unauthorized commercial activity. My jaw tightened. The letter went on to say that a complaint had been filed against me, alleging that I was operating a private clinic or paid therapeutic service out of my home without proper permits. It cited alleged zoning violations and warned that failure to comply could result in fines up to $25,000 and an order to cease commercial operations. I read it twice before the words really landed. Then I laughed. Short, bitter, a sound I hadn't made since Afghanistan. Karen was playing dirty. I called Derek first. "They're saying we're running a business." He let out a long, flat breath on the other end. "You kidding?" "Wish I was. They think we're running an unlicensed psych clinic or something." "Jesus, Rye. I'm licensed in the state, but we're not charging anyone." "I know, but someone's decided to weaponize the bureaucracy." He didn't even need to ask who. We both knew. I spent the next few hours making calls. A local attorney came recommended through a vet-owned hardware store I liked, Laura Martinez, ex-JAG, now practicing civil litigation. I called her. She picked up after 2 rings, calm and precise like someone who doesn't believe in wasting syllables. I laid out the situation. She asked a few sharp questions, then told me to email her everything. Letter, photos if I had them, background on the HOA. "Expect escalation," she said. "These people usually don't back off once they get momentum." By the end of the day, I was angrier than I'd been in months. Not the explosive kind. The slow, creeping heat in your spine that builds when you realize someone's trying to smear mud on something sacred. 2 days later, I got a copy of the complaint submitted to zoning. Laura got it first and forwarded it with the subject line, "Brace yourself." I opened the PDF and felt my stomach clench. It was a multi-page dossier with timestamps, photographs, and typed statements. The photographs were zoomed-in shots of people entering and exiting my garage, mostly from the back angle, clearly taken from an elevated position. I recognized the vantage point. Karen's neighbor had a 2-story shed with a deck. She must have bribed or sweet-talked her way into it. Some photos were edited, deliberately grainy, black and white, with red circles drawn around containers and boxes like we were smuggling narcotics out in bulk. One image showed Derek carrying a case of bottled water. It was labeled Suspected Medical Supply. The complaint claimed that unknown substances and medical equipment were being brought into the home weekly, that people left visibly distressed, and that unauthorized therapy sessions were taking place without regulation or state oversight. It also alleged vehicular congestion impacting traffic flow and safety in the adjacent HOA community. There were no signatures on the statements, but the language was unmistakably Karen's. Faux objective, loaded with phrases like, "We are concerned," and "This may constitute a danger to public peace." She'd even included a bullet point suggesting I was exploiting emotionally vulnerable individuals for unlicensed treatment. Laura called me 10 minutes later. "It's nasty, but not unexpected," she said. "They're building a paper wall hoping you won't climb it. But it's full of holes." We prepped a response. Derek provided proof of licensure. I submitted a sworn affidavit clarifying there were no fees involved, and Laura included photos of the garage setup, the seating arrangement, and the snack table. No money collection point, no registration list, nothing that even remotely suggested a business, but the city still scheduled a formal hearing. On the morning of the hearing, I wore my old Marine Corps' blazer, not for theatrics, just for strength. Derek came with me. Laura met us at the courthouse, crisp and unflappable in a gray suit. The zoning board was 5 people behind a desk and 1 secretary typing nonstop. Across the aisle sat Karen. She wore beige. Even her face seemed beige, smug, flat, confident in the way only people drunk on minor authority could be. She gave a prepared statement, spoke of safety, of neighborhood standards, of unregulated clinical activity. She never used my name, just the homeowner. Her voice had that practiced concern, the kind rich women use when donating to causes they don't understand. Laura was brutal and surgical. She countered every point, dropped citations of zoning code like precision airstrikes, and pointed out that the complainant wasn't even a legal stakeholder in my property or its jurisdiction. When the board asked if Karen had ever approached me to discuss her concerns directly, Laura smiled and said she did, and was told clearly and legally that the property falls outside the HOA. She chose to escalate instead of respect. The board didn't make a ruling that day. They said they'd take the matter under review and issue a recommendation within a week. Karen walked past me without making eye contact, her heels clacking like a metronome. She wasn't smiling anymore. I stood in the parking lot afterward, hands on my hips, staring into the heat waves rising off the asphalt. Derek said nothing. He didn't have to. Whatever came next, I had no illusions. Karen wasn't done. The following Wednesday started like any other. The sun was already high by 9, the heat sharp enough to strip paint off a car. I spent the morning sweeping out the garage, making sure the folding chairs were in order. The AC unit was still humming along, and the coffee machine had fresh filters. Derek texted me around noon to say he'd be a little late. Counseling session ran long. No problem. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of our meetings by now. By 5:30, the guys started showing up. There was Marcus, who used to do route clearance in Fallujah, Jeff, a fireman who retired early after a roof collapsed on him during a 4-alarm, Sanchez, a National Guard medic who never talked about the Humvee explosion but still limped on the same leg. A couple new faces too, people Derek had met through outreach. We shook hands, made awkward introductions, and I did what I always did. Welcomed them in, offered cold water, and tried to make it feel like more than a garage. The door was closed. The box fan was humming. Derek eventually rolled in and got us started. It was one of the quieter sessions. Some nights are heavy. Others are just silence and breathing, and a few shared looks that say, I get it. This one was somewhere in between. Sanchez talked about his daughter's birthday. Marcus admitted he hadn't slept in 4 nights. Derek prompted with soft questions, never pushing, always anchoring. Then we heard the sound. 3 vehicles pulling into the driveway. Heavy, deliberate. Not friends. You know that sound when you've heard it in war zones. Tires crunching gravel with too much certainty. I stood up and opened the garage door just as 2 uniformed officers stepped out of a marked patrol car, followed by a third in plainclothes with a badge clipped to his belt. Body cameras were on. Radios crackled. Behind them, a 4th officer was talking into a shoulder mic while eyeing the license plates of the cars parked along the street. The lead officer held out a hand. Good evening, sir. We received a call about suspicious activity at this address. Possible narcotics distribution. I stared at him for a moment, then raised an eyebrow. You serious? He gave me a look. Not unfriendly, just tired. We have to respond to every call. Mind if we take a look around? You're standing in a support group for veterans, I said. No one's selling anything, unless you're interested in lukewarm coffee and trauma bonding. One of the other officers, a stocky guy in his 40s with a salt and pepper buzz cut, tilted his head slightly. Are you Brooks? Ryan Brooks? Yeah, he nodded slowly. I'm Sergeant David Lawrence, 18th Airborne, Mosul, 06. Heard about your group through some guys I know in the department. Mind if I step in? That deflated the whole scene in seconds. I stepped aside and he walked in like he belonged there, which in a way he did. The other 2 officers followed, less sure of themselves now, their posture softening as they took in the circle of chairs, the folded American flag, the snacks on a fold-out table. A couple guys stood, unsure. One was already reaching for his bag like he might need to leave. Lawrence raised a hand. At ease. Nobody's in trouble. This isn't a raid. Derek stepped forward, showing his state therapist license. I'm the facilitator. Nobody's being charged for anything. These are private therapeutic sessions for veterans, not medical services or commercial work. Lawrence looked at the license, then turned back to his colleagues. Turn off the cameras. They hesitated. That's an order, he said. You're about to record a protected therapeutic environment. HIPAA, state law, ethics, turn them off. Click, click, lights off. The air in the garage shifted again. We offered them coffee. Lawrence declined, but he sat with us for a few minutes, talked about how hard it was to sleep after getting out, mentioned his brother, who didn't make it back. He didn't say much, didn't have to. Just being there changed the tone of the whole encounter. Afterward, in the driveway, I asked him flat out, who made the call? He shrugged, but his face said enough. Anonymous tip. Same neighborhood. You've probably already got a name in mind. I nodded. He leaned in, lowered his voice. I document everything from now on. Time, names, license plates if you can. If this escalates, you'll want the paper trail. I've got legal counsel, I said, and a pretty pissed-off therapist. He grinned. Good. Keep doing what you're doing. It matters. They drove off without saying much else. Just like that, the threat evaporated, but the scent lingered. Something about being falsely accused, about watching armed officers step onto your property with suspicion, hits different when you've spent your life protecting other people's homes. I stepped back into the garage. The guys were still sitting in the circle, half-full paper cups in hand. Marcus muttered, "That was a new one." "Better than mortars," Sanchez said. Jeff added, "Barely." We laughed. Because what else do you do? The video went up that same night. I didn't even know it was happening until Sanchez texted me a link with a thumbs-up emoji and the words, "Watch this." It was a short clip, barely 90 seconds. One of the newer guys, Dylan, had filmed it on his phone right after the cops left. He stood out on my driveway with the garage still open behind him and spoke into the camera with a calm, even tone that somehow hit harder than a full speech. "I'm a veteran. I came back from Iraq with PTSD. Every Wednesday I go to a support group with other vets. Free of charge. No doctor's bills, no forms. Just people talking and healing. Tonight, someone called the cops on us. Said we were dealing drugs or running some kind of illegal clinic. The cops showed up. They saw what was happening. They apologized. But it shouldn't have happened at all." He ended it simply. "If you think this is a problem, maybe the problem isn't us." It blew up overnight. I don't mean mild traction or local interest. I mean viral, like a brush fire in dry scrub. By morning, it had over 100,000 views. By lunch, it was on Twitter, Facebook, even Reddit. Veterans groups reposted it. Advocates picked it up. Someone clipped in news footage of Congress members talking about the suicide crisis among service members. Someone else added slow music. There were hashtags. Doxer mid-watch support. Doxer veterans deserve better. PTSD is not a crime. I started getting phone calls from old buddies I hadn't heard from in years. People from boot camp. A guy I hadn't talked to since Okinawa messaged me on Facebook to say he saw me in the background of the clip and just wanted to say thanks. It got surreal fast. Then came the press. A news van rolled up to my house by Thursday afternoon. Channel 12, local affiliate. A young woman named Alina stepped out with a cameraman and asked if I'd be willing to talk. I hesitated, but Derek said, "Might be the only way to cut through the crap." So I agreed. We stood in the garage, same chairs, same setup, and she asked simple questions. "Who are you? What do you do here? Why do you think someone called the police?" I answered as plainly as I could. "We're a bunch of guys trying not to fall apart, that's all. If that threatens someone, maybe they need to ask themselves why." The story aired that night. The calls got crazier after that. Emails flooded in. People offering donations, free coffee supplies, replacement chairs. A bakery offered to send pastries every Wednesday. A retired Marine colonel emailed from Oregon asking if he could come sit in sometime. One message stood out. It was from a congressional office in D.C., someone named Grace working for Representative Blake, a decorated Navy vet. She said he was deeply concerned about what happened and would be making a public statement. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Not publicly, anyway. But the internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't let go. People found her Facebook profile, still live, full of generic HOA propaganda and old posts about preserving property values and protecting families from disruptive elements. It didn't take long before screenshots started circulating. Then someone dug up an old video of her speaking at a city council meeting 2 years ago, complaining that people with unstable emotional conditions shouldn't be unsupervised in residential neighborhoods. The backlash was immediate and volcanic. A local vet group staged a small protest outside the Oak Ridge Estates entrance. Nothing violent, just flags, signs, and a barbecue grill. A few HOA members came out, confused and sheepish. One of them told a reporter, "We didn't even know she was doing this. We thought she was reporting a noise issue." Turns out, Karen had filed the HOA complaint without a formal vote. She'd acted entirely on her own, using her title as leverage. The board started to crack. 2 members resigned. A third issued a public apology through her lawyer. HOA leadership went into panic mode. And not quietly. Then Karen made her fatal mistake. She gave an interview to a local magazine, probably thinking she could control the narrative. She wore cream-colored linen and spoke from her living room, framed by tasteful art and a plant that looked fake. "These men, I'm sure, have gone through things," she said carefully. "But that doesn't give them the right to destabilize our neighborhood with unsupervised activity. I've spoken to several concerned parents. If these individuals are suffering from mental episodes, perhaps they should be seeking help in a proper facility, not someone's garage." She might as well have poured gasoline on a bonfire. By the end of the day, 5 veteran organizations had issued formal statements condemning her remarks. One cable news host called her an anti-American suburban tyrant. A retired general posted on Twitter, "I'd rather have PTSD than a neighbor like her." The HOA issued a desperate, awkward press release, distancing itself from statements made by individual members. Karen's name was suddenly radioactive. Derek and I sat on the back porch that night, watching my dog chase moths around the citronella torch. He sipped his beer slowly, then said, "I think she woke up the wrong tribe." I nodded. "And they're just getting started." I always figured if I ever ended up in court again, it'd be for speeding or telling off a parking official. Civil litigation, that was never on my bingo card. But by the time the news cycle cooled and the internet mobs moved on to their next meal, what remained wasn't anger. It was resolve. It started with a phone call from Jason. He was one of the quieter guys in the group. Navy, logistics, steady as hell. I didn't know much about his life post-service, except that he wore polo shirts even on weekends and always brought good donuts. Turns out, he was a damn lawyer. "I don't usually lead with that," he said when he called, "but what Karen did, it's actionable. I mean that literally. If you're interested, I'll help build a case." I didn't even need to think about it. I'm in, but not just for me. Good, because I already talked to Sanchez, Marcus, and 4 others. They're in too. By the end of the week, we had 12 people signed onto a lawsuit, a collective civil action against both Karen Fitzgerald and the HOA itself, for defamation, emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and abuse of authority. It wasn't just about what she'd done to me. It was about the camera, the surveillance, the lies she told, and the hell she'd tried to unleash on people who had already crawled through enough of it. Laura, my original attorney, brought in a litigation specialist from her firm. Jason handled vetting and coordination. Together, they built a case with the kind of precision usually reserved for demolitions, careful placement, maximum impact. They requested Karen's emails through legal channels. They subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications. What they found was worse than expected. Turns out Karen had been playing queen for a long time. We uncovered documents showing she'd threatened legal action against a local piano teacher for operating an unlicensed school. The teacher had stopped giving lessons after months of harassment. Then there was a neighbor who ran a daycare from her home. Karen had called Child Protective Services on her twice, anonymously. Same wording, same complaints. False every time. But the camera, that's what really did it. A private investigator hired by Laura's firm took one look at the angles on the original complaint photos and found the source, a mounted long-range zoom camera inside the attic vent of Karen's neighbor's house, pointed directly at my driveway and garage. The neighbor was in the dark about it. Literally. Karen had bribed the woman's teenage son to let her install it, paid him cash. The kid confessed everything when questioned, so now we had trespassing, illegal surveillance, and Karen using all of it in an official complaint to a government body, knowingly, willfully. On paper, Jason and the team filed the complaint in Maricopa County Court. The initial damages request, $2.7 million. Enough to make anyone sweat, especially when your HOA is already hemorrhaging members and your name has become synonymous with veteran bashing. Karen went silent for a few days, then hired a Scottsdale firm with shiny branding and a reputation for dragging things out until everyone gives up. Bad move. We weren't backing off. We got support from the Arizona chapter of the ACLU. Even a local chapter of the DAV offered pro bono consultation. Suddenly, we weren't just a group of angry veterans. We were plaintiffs with national attention. That's when HOA leadership started eating itself alive. The interim president, a guy named Roger who looked like he'd been pressured into the role during a barbecue, called a community meeting. Several dozen residents showed up. Some were angry, some confused. Some just wanted to know if they still had trash pickup on Tuesdays. Roger read a statement prepared by the HOA's council distancing the organization from Karen's actions and asserting that no formal vote or approval was issued, authorizing the surveillance or complaint against Mr. Brooks. Too little, too late. The best part? One of the board members resigned mid-meeting and walked straight over to me in the back row. Her name was Marcia, a retired teacher, soft-spoken, tired eyes. She apologized, said she'd been bullied into silence for years. Told me Karen once made her cry over lawn ornament violations. She agreed to testify. A few days later, a manila envelope appeared on my doorstep. No name, just taped shut and slid under the mat. Inside were copies of HOA emails. Damning ones. Karen bragging about catching the PTSD group in the act, joking that next time maybe they'll get arrested for loitering with intent to cry. My favorite line. I can't wait until we get that trash out of the neighborhood for good. Laura's. Paralegal traced the emails. They were legit. The tide had fully turned. The media came back, now with a new hook. Lawsuit filed against HOA president for targeting veterans group. We didn't say much publicly. Didn't have to. The filings spoke louder than any press release. One night, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the garage. The lights were dimmed. The flag above the bookshelf rippled gently under the breeze from the AC unit. I looked around, at the chairs, the scuffed floor, the old thermos on the side table. All this noise because we sat down and talked. Karen had picked the wrong people to bully, and now she was about to learn what real accountability looked like. The courthouse in Maricopa County isn't fancy. It's beige brick and buzzing fluorescence, old carpet that smells like cardboard and anxiety. But to us, walking in that first day of the pretrial hearings, it might as well have been the Capitol. 12 of us sat shoulder to shoulder on the plaintiff's side of the room. Some wore jackets, some wore service pins. No uniforms, just quiet dignity and tired eyes. Karen came in with a trio of attorneys flanking her like she was royalty. She wore dark sunglasses indoors and a silk scarf, like she thought she was stepping onto a movie set. One look at her, and I knew. She still thought she could win. Not legally, just in public opinion. She hadn't realized the public had already decided what she was. Our lawyer, Laura, was all business. Cool, steady, surgical. Jason sat beside her, occasionally sliding notes across the table. A small smirk, always curling at the corner of his mouth. The defense tried to start with procedural nonsense. Claimed the complaint was vague, that the surveillance camera wasn't definitively linked to Karen, that emotional distress was subjective and non-quantifiable. Judge Pennington, silver hair, worn face, no patience for bullshit, looked over her glasses and said, "Counsel, we're not here to debate whether the plaintiffs have emotions. We're here to decide if someone stomped on them." The hearing moved forward. What came next was brutal and beautiful. Jason presented the first batch of HOA emails, including the ones from the anonymous envelope. Karen's lawyer tried to object on chain of custody grounds. Denied. Then came Derek's testimony. He took the stand, calm as ever, and walked the court through what we did each Wednesday. The structure, the purpose, the total lack of money, and the therapeutic value. He brought printed sign-in logs, all first names only, voluntarily filled, and explained why we didn't track anything further. Privacy, dignity, safety. Then it was my turn. I stood there, hand raised, sworn in, and told them everything. About the group, about Karen showing up that first time, about the police visit, the zoning complaint, the photos, the backlash. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the stenographer had stopped typing at one point. I spent 20 years defending this country, I said, only to come home and be treated like a criminal for sitting in a circle and trying not to fall apart. There were tears in the gallery. Not from us, from others. The court officer in the back wiped his face. Pennington didn't flinch, but I saw her expression soften. Then came the surprise. Marcia, the former board member who had resigned, took the stand and testified under subpoena. She told the court how Karen regularly used HOA resources to settle personal vendettas, including against a man who had repainted his fence the wrong shade of tan, and a woman who hosted a Girl Scouts meeting in her garage. She spoke quietly, ashamed, but every word landed like a hammer. Karen's lawyer objected to the irrelevance of these incidents. The judge allowed it under pattern of behavior. Then came the worst for Karen. The neighbor's son, 17, lanky, terrified, testified via video call. He admitted Karen paid him $100 in cash to let her into their attic and install a camera. She said it was just to keep the neighborhood safe, he said, voice trembling. I didn't know it was illegal. The judge asked him gently, "Did you ever tell your parents?" He nodded. When the news broke out, my mom freaked. Laura brought out the investigator's report next. Detailed diagrams of the camera placement, matching timestamps, and metadata from the complaint photos that lined up with the camera's storage device. Karen's face was stone. No blinking, no shifting, just blank. The defense tried to pivot, said Karen had good intentions, that she was acting on behalf of community concerns, that she had no malice, only misunderstanding. Jason stood up so calmly it was almost theatrical. So she just accidentally submitted fake evidence to zoning, filed a false police report, and called traumatized veterans a neighborhood threat. That's a hell of a misunderstanding. The judge called a recess. I walked outside into the blinding Arizona sun, heart hammering like I'd just run laps in full gear. The others followed slowly. We didn't say much, just stood in a loose group by the flagpole. Reporters were there, of course, but we didn't need the cameras. We were already being heard. Properly this time. The verdict didn't come right away. It never does. Justice, for all its ceremony, has the pacing of a tortoise with a limp. But in the week between the final hearing and the judge's decision, things began unraveling for Karen faster than any of us expected. The local paper ran an op-ed titled, "When Power Corrupts in Your Own Backyard," naming Karen Fitzgerald as a case study in overreach and moral failure. The city council, the very same one she had once lobbied for a seat on, issued a formal statement condemning any coordinated harassment or abuse of civic office for personal grievance. One council member, also a retired Army nurse, wrote bluntly, "I won't share a bench with someone who targets veterans." Full stop. Then came the investigation. Turns out our lawsuit had done more than rattle the HOA. It sparked interest from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. With our case now in public view, a civil rights organization quietly handed over a folder of past complaints they'd compiled on Karen, not just from Oak Ridge, but from 2 other neighborhoods she'd served before moving here. False reports, surveillance without consent, allegations of racial bias. A whistleblower from a previous HOA had even filed an ethics complaint against her 5 years back. Ignored, buried, not anymore. We were called back into court, but this time it was different. Karen was in handcuffs. She'd been arrested on multiple charges, filing false police reports, submitting fraudulent materials to a government agency, unlawful surveillance, and malicious harassment. They'd tacked on abuse of position and data privacy violations once the full scope of the email chains became evidence. It wasn't just civil anymore. This was criminal. She sat at the defense table, wrists cuffed in front of her. No makeup, no sunglasses, no scarf. Just a woman stripped of her illusion, shrinking behind the weight of her choices. The trial was short. The state had more than enough. Our attorneys coordinated to share records. The DA's office used our evidence to build its own case. We sat in the gallery as each count was read aloud, 7 in total. Her lawyer tried to offer a plea deal, but it was too late. The prosecution wanted an example made. The sentencing hearing was surreal. Karen's voice cracked for the first time when she stood to speak. I didn't mean harm. I truly believed I was protecting the community. I was under a lot of stress. I thought I was doing the right thing. Judge Pennington didn't flinch. You used your position to target vulnerable people seeking help. You lied to authorities, falsified documents, and spied on your neighbors. You manipulated others into participating in your obsession with control. And worst of all, you exploited the authority of a homeowners association as a personal weapon. That is not stress, Ms. Fitzgerald. That is malice. 15 years. 7 without parole. Karen didn't cry. She just stood there, blinking slowly, like someone waking up in a cell of her own making. Outside the courthouse, we stood in a line under the same flag we'd once stood beneath in other uniforms, in other places. Reporters buzzed, but we didn't say much. We didn't need to. The papers spoke for us. The sentence did the rest. Oak Ridge HOA was dissolved within the month. The city appointed a transitional housing committee to oversee the neighborhood's governance. Residents voted on new representation. Marcia was elected chair, unanimous. She called me 2 days later to say she was forming a neighborhood outreach program for veterans and first responders. I said I'd help however I could. We all would. And that Wednesday, right on schedule, the garage was open again. More chairs, new faces, more coffee than we knew what to do with, and a small brass plaque mounted to the inside wall of the garage, right above the flag. To those who served, and to those who still carry the fight. No ceremony, no speech, just presence. And then, the last moment, the one that burned into my mind like a photograph I'll carry forever. As we stepped outside at the end of the meeting, just as the sun started to set and the cicadas lit up like little broken radios, we saw the sheriff's transport van pull away from the courthouse, headed toward the prison processing center. Karen sat in the back, wrists still cuffed, staring blankly out the mesh window. She watched as we raised a fresh American flag on the pole outside my house, watched as we saluted, watched as a group of broken, healing, stubborn men stood tall in the face of everything she tried to destroy. And then the van turned the corner and disappeared. It's been 6 months. Arizona summer has bled into fall, though you wouldn't know it by the temperature. The mornings are cooler now, and the evenings actually feel like evenings again, not just smaller, darker ovens. Life has started to hum again. Not loud, not fast. Just steady, like a good engine after a long rebuild. The group's still going, bigger than ever. We had to expand. Someone donated an old Airstream, and we use it for overflow when the garage gets tight. There's a waiting list now, not for therapy, but for seats. Word got out. Police departments started referring guys. One fire captain from Mesa drives 40 minutes just to sit in for 30. We even had a state senator show up once. Didn't announce himself, just walked in, sat down, listened, and left. Later, he sent a handwritten letter. We never asked for that, never chased it. But sometimes, when you plant something with care, it grows even through concrete. The neighborhood is different too. Marcia turned out to be the real deal. Fair, thoughtful, surprisingly sharp with city code. She brokered a truce between Oak Ridge and the surrounding streets. The new HOA charter bans surveillance without board approval and requires any complaint to be co-signed by at least 2 members. It's not perfect. Nothing ever is. But it breathes easier now. People wave. Dogs bark less. Kids ride bikes where they didn't before. And Karen, still gone, serving her time. I don't think about her much. But sometimes I do remember that last image, her face in that van, pressed up to the wire mesh as we raised the flag. She didn't yell, didn't protest, just watched, like she finally realized what she couldn't control. Funny thing is, the flag wasn't even new. Same one we always used, a little sun-faded, slight tear on the edge, but it still flew true, and I think that's what broke her. That after everything she tried, it was still standing. Last Wednesday, we held a small ceremony. No press, no big speeches, just the regulars and a few new guys who'd made it through a hard year. Someone brought a bugler. Another guy, Air Force, quiet type, made a wooden stand for the plaque. We mounted it right by the garage entrance. It reads, "For those who served, for those who still carry the burden, for those who were almost silenced." And below that, the Midwatch, established in brotherhood, proven in fire. We stood in silence for a full minute. Then someone cracked a joke about the coffee being strong enough to refinish wood floors. And everyone laughed. That's how we heal. Not in declarations, but in defiance. In the everyday. In showing up when everything tells you not to. After they all left, I lingered a while, turned off the lights, pulled the garage door down, locked up, and stood alone under the stars, hands in my pockets, wind tugging gently at the flag overhead. Didn't say a word, didn't need to.